Yes. So I think what happened is, I don't know if anyone had to update their Mac this week, but my Mac updated, I don't know, about 2 days ago. I pushed off restarting. I restarted, and I had to go back to the site in order to, oh, I see. I see the Zoom thing. Thanks, Connor. Awesome. Yes, signing. Sweet. Okay, so now I'm recording. We're back in action. Okay. All right, let's jump in. We only lost 6 minutes there. Make that time up. Okay, so we are going to continue with what we're doing, React Router. There's a lot to React Router. In all honesty, React Router could be a full day, 3 or 4 days long to really get to the depths of React Router. So we're just kind of touching the surface. But there are a few more things that we need to kind of go over. A few of the things that we're going to go over is switch, redirect, and using render to render a components. So let me open up baseball. So here's my starter code for baseball. I'm going to fork this so this becomes the official solution. So I'll keep this as kind of starter code. And I'll fork it. So I'll have, full solution. Okay. So here, let me select this out. This is what I'll be. What I'll be using. Okay. So let's kind of go over what we did last class. I'll open this up. Here we have a navigation, right? Here's our nav with home, roster, and schedule. So these particular links take us to what seem like different pages, right? They take us to different pages. However, we're not really going to another page, right? It's not as though the browser refreshed. All that happened was the content changed, but the nav remained consistent on the page, okay? So one of the benefits of React Router is that you can create kind of a single page app, which is really what React is about anyway. It's about like rendering a specific component if a conditional logic is met. And then Router takes it one step further that allows us to do that based on these routes. So when this route changes, so does the content. The change in a route triggers another component to actually be rendered within a predefined space. So roster gives me roster, schedule gives me schedule. I get the scheduling page, and I can kind of bounce around between these. Now, here is our architecture. I extended the architecture just a little bit to include the switch to wrap around what would be our routes. So if we take a look at the code, all right, I'm just going to go back to the code real quick. Here we have, let me see what's going on here. Okay. We have router, which is one of those React router DOM components. Browser router as router. Browser router is the real component. We're just renaming it router. Okay. So you might see in tutorials, they're referencing it as browser router. You might see it as browser router as router, whatever you see it as. Most of the time they're doing it like this. And we wrap the app component around it, thereby allowing the app component full routing functionality. Okay. Anything not wrapped in this won't have the routing functionality. You can add routes, but they won't do anything because the router is the thing that's listening. So if I go to app, here we see app itself doesn't actually have any routes. We created a header, and this is our header, and then we created a main, which would be this. This is our main, okay? And so in header, what we have are links. These are the link components, right? So we imported this. And the difference between a link component and just a standard anchor tag, if I was just to create, an anchor tag here, href is equal to home, right? And just say home using anchor right? So you could just see it. I just want you to see something on the page. If I have this and I click on it, I'm going to go here and click on it. The page refreshes. It takes me home. So if I'm a roster and I click on this, the page refreshes, I go back home. But if I click on this, I don't get a page refresh, okay? That's first and foremost. So I'm gonna remove this, we don't need this. Just wanted to demo that. So the link just allows us to coordinate with router saying, hey, don't go anywhere, don't refresh the page. It's almost like adding a event prevent default when you do an on submit, right? That was the thing we learned when we did on submit, is we need event prevent default versus an on click. An event like a submit requires that the page refreshes because that's the natural behavior. So we added our links just to say, hey, change the route. All this is responsible is for changing the route, and then the route themselves are being listened to in main. Okay, and so in main, I have these specific routes, one for the home routes, one for schedule, and one for a roster, and they are rendering or using the component keyword to render a specific component, right? So I import home, schedule, and roster, and then I call home, schedule, and roster here. I think we could also do this. I think if I did schedule, let me see. I think if we did this, it would be the same thing. We're not really going to see home, schedule. Oh, no, breaks can't do that. All right. We have to do it like this. All right. So, oh, you know why? I think, oh, never mind. We'll just leave it like this. And so we're using component to tell it. There's another keyword that we can use, and that keyword, and that's part of what we're going to be covering, is render. Render is a keyword that we're going to be using instead of component, and it extends the functionality. It allows us to pass props, because using component won't allow us to pass a prop, okay? So I'm here, I'm in schedule. So the first thing I want to introduce is switch. Now, what switch does is switch allows us to do, or to allow React to choose the first matching route and only render that. Now, the exact keyword, does anybody remember why the exact keyword is here? Anybody remember?
Because if you don't have the exact keyword, then it will render all of them.
Okay, so now I don't have exact on the other ones, and just on home though, right? So
it's not nested in the other ones though.
Yeah, so I'm gonna remove that and let's see what happens. So home, roster, and schedule, right? So when this gets met, we're saying if this matches, which it does, awesome, render it because there's a /. And oh, by the way, this path matches also, so render that as well, right? So the exact keyword allows us to like say, only if it matches this, then do this, right? Now, if I took this route and maybe put it towards the bottom, would that change any of the functionality? Wouldn't change it either, right? Home would still be home. It'd still render the components, but now it's rendering them kind of in like the reverse order, right? Now roster page is up here because that's the first thing that got seen, and then path to route becomes the other one, right? Okay, so I'm gonna put this back up here. Now, there's a way for us to force router to render the first matching one using a specific component, and the component's called switch. So I'm going to import switch, right? Switch, okay. And so, you know, hey, it's imported, but it's not used. Switch is declared, but never used. Awesome. We are going to include switch, right? And switch now will surround our routes. And so I'm just going to go back to the diagram real quick. I have switch here, and it is wrapped around all of our routes. Just like router up here was wrapped around the app, right? So we know that up here we would have had router, right? Router, and then in the middle we would have app, right? And down here it's the same thing. We would have something like switch. So I just copy this, paste it, bring it down here. We'd have something like switch, switch, and then we'd have different routes, right? So this would be route, and that would render a component, and then we have another route, and that would render another component. So switch is wrapping it, and so switch is giving additional functionality, right? When you wrap a component in another component, then the parent component is obviously giving functionality or providing some additional functionality. So we're here, I wrapped around switch, and now if I still do this, like, now it's not doing anything. Right? Let me see what happened there. Home, welcome to tornadoes, roster, nothing really changes. I'm still on the home route. It's a little weird now, right? At least before, I was able to be like, oh, show this one, and I saw two. The minute I added switch, I don't see anything but home. But let me see, if I add this exact keyword here, does that change it? Yes, it changes it. And we're almost back to the normal way we did it, right? It's like, well, why would we need switch there? It seems like it was working fine without it. What the switch allows us to do is kind of reorder these routes to have the most specific routes at the very top and the least specific towards the bottom, so that the first matching route wins. And I don't need the exact keyword anymore, okay? So this is so generic, it's like everything has a /, so everybody's like part of the party, right? And we don't want that. So putting schedule, very specific. Roster, very specific. This, very generic. Everything kind of falls into that route. What you're going to see is either things are arranged like this, or people will just have a tendency to do this and put exact here. You might see that a lot. A lot of people like to have the default route at the very top, just kind of a habitual thing. Default route and then all the routes. But for the sake of using switch, for the full functionality of it, I would put the default route towards the bottom. And then that way we only hit a specific matching route, okay? That's really the value of switch. Switch is meant to show the first matching route, and it does so based on very specific towards the top and least specific towards the bottom, okay? That's really all switch is doing there, okay? The second thing I want to kind of cover is redirect, okay? So what happens right now, I have a user goes to our site, they're on roster, and they're like, oh, I want to go to rosters. What happened? Like, I'm not even on the home, I'm not even on the rosters page now. It took me back to home page. I don't get it. Like, all right, I'm going to go back to roster. All right, now I'm on the roster page, but I'm going to mistype this again. Rostery, it doesn't really matter what you type. And it was kind of taking me back. I'm like, it's not maybe what I want to do. In this instance, that's what we're going to do. We're going to force it back to the home page. But it would be confusing for the user to see this as the route, but only see the home page. Doesn't really make much sense. It might confuse someone to be that. And we all know, like, if we're trying to hit a site and the route doesn't exist, we usually get like a 404, right? Site can't be found, something like that. So what we want to do is handle those potential mistakes. Potentially a user's just like, I want to go here, and they mistype it, and we want to, in our working example, all we're going to do is kind of send them back to the home page. That's really what we're going to do. Kind of the default functionality that we just saw, but with the intent of sending them back to the home page. So what we can do here is, let's see, redirect. I think I'm going to do this as a route path. So we can say route path, or here we go. Let me do redirect. I think I could just do this. Redirect to, oh no, I'm sorry. We're going to do this. Route path is equal to anything else that we don't know of. We're going to do something. Now, this is where I am going to incorporate that new keyword I was talking about, the render keyword. And so here, actually, you know what we can do? We don't have to do this. I'm doing more than I need to. Redirect to that. Okay. So what we're saying here now is, and I'm getting this message because I didn't import redirect. Okay. Message goes away. What we're saying now is this. Follow the path of all these things. And if you find something that doesn't match, well, send it here to this thing. All right, so roster. I'm just going to make sure they all work. All right, home, roster. Everything looks good. I go to roster and I do rosters. It still takes me back here, right? And I believe it's because I need, at this point, the exact keyword there. So that's why you're going to see sometimes this at the very top, because in order to fulfill this, and I do rosters, let me see, it's taking me back. But look at the URL now. Do you see that the URL changed? The URL now is this instead of the roster. So I'm going to get rid of this exact keyword, all right? I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go to roster. I'm going to type rosters. And let's see. It didn't redirect me back. I mean, it shows me the default site, but I'm still seeing a route up here, which would be confusing to the user. So here, if I do add that exact keyword, then I have the ability now to say, you know, if it's home, that's cool. But if it's anything else, I need you to send me back to the home route. Okay, or wherever you want to go. We could have created a 404 page, right? So I could have said here, given it a 404 page and then rendered a component that's like 404 hitting the wrong page. Like we could have done that too as well. All right, right now we're just going to forward it back to the home page. Okay. So the two things that we just incorporated was switch and redirect. Those were the two things that we incorporated into our route. Now, what we don't see, and I'm going to go to the fully functioning site, right? This, once again, is the fully, oh, that's not it. Hold on. Let me go to the code along. Here's the demo of the code along. Okay, select this out again. Here is our demo, right? This is the functionality we're trying to achieve. And if I go to roster, I see the users, right? I see all of the players in the roster. Now, our site right now doesn't really have anything, just has a home page, right? Just a roster page. I don't see anything. I would like to see the roster of players, right? So what we need to do now is, what do you think we need to do? Who wants to like give me an idea of what they think we need to do? Any ideas? I want to see data.
It seems like we need to loop over the roster in the wherever our data is, but I don't know what we would be rendering.
Okay. So I think in the end, if we look at this, these look like list items, right? If I just go and I examine them, these are just going to be a UL, an LI, and just some anchor tags, right? But I want you to pay close attention to this also, to when we do render them. At some point in time, we are going to update it to include the ID of the thing, okay? So this number here is 1, and if I go to the next one, it will be 2. You see how it's roster /2, okay? And so what we're going to need to do is add an additional route to the anchor tag or the link tag, right? Because that's what controls the routes. And if I click on one of these, watch how the roster changes to roster /1. That's going to be a brand new route. We got to create that route. And then we have to figure out a way to be like, well, if it's 1, how do I know to tell React, find that object in the array, right? So we're going to have to do some sort of filtering to be like, hey, go over the array, find the element that has an ID of 1 or whatever that 1 represents, return back its value, and then show it on the screen, right? So that's some logic. But before we do that, we need to like import the players. So here's a players array of players that's stored in roster data. That's where I put it, right? And I'm exporting this players array of data. Okay. So if I go to main, which is kind of where we're going to be using this, I have to import that, right? So I have to import, and I'm going to call it players from, and we can just say roster data, right? I think I could just do, I don't even need the JS. I want to confirm that I have it, right? Players is created, but not, never used. So I'm just going to, console log and say, this is players. When you're leaving console logs, I highly suggest that you leave some indication of what it is that you're console logging. I'm helping my day students all day, and this is their final project week, and they are just console logging everything, and I'm like, well, where's that coming from? And they're like, I don't really know. What's the data? What is it supposed to be outputting? I don't really know. And so they get all these console logs, and you don't know what the data you know what you're looking at because you can see it, but you don't know what function it's coming from. Is it props, everything? Is it some other value? So I'm going to go here and just make sure in my console, all right, I get it. I don't know what's happening here. I'm going to get rid of all these messages. Something happened here. Let me see. All right. ID is in the store. Here we go. I'm not sure, 106, no matching. Not sure what that is coming from, but here, I have the users, right? I have the users, which means I can do something with those users, right? And those users belong on, we just go back here, they belong on the roster page, right? So how do I pass to the roster route this data? That's the question. How do I get the data there? Okay. Now, you might think to yourself, I don't know, the way we've done it in the past is we've given a prop. So you might think like, I don't know, I'll call it players, and players will equal, players, right? Thinking to yourself, I'll pass players down as a prop, and that'll make its way to roster. Okay, well, let's see if that's even the case. So roster is a functional component. I'm going to give it props here because if we pass props down, we need a placeholder. And I'm going to console log and say, this is roster, roster props. So I know what I'm doing. Props. Okay, let's take a look. What do we got? What do we got here? Got all these errors. I don't know where all these errors are coming from. This is roster props. Let me get rid of all the just user, right? I want to see all these, just the info. This is roster. I don't even see it. Do you see it? I don't see it. Right? I don't even see this as roster. Do you see this as roster? I don't see it. No. But I know that this page, oh, you know what? It's not being rendered. Now it should be. Right? There we go. Okay. It wasn't being rendered because I wasn't on the page, right? I have to execute the route for that component to actually render. So these components don't automatically show anything because they're not active until you activate it. So now I go here and I'm like, oh, cool. Let me go here. Woof. I have a bunch of stuff I didn't even know I had. Look at this. I didn't pass down history, location, match. I didn't pass any of that. And yet I have additional information here. We're going to get into that later. I'm not going to go into this. What I wanted to show you was there is no prop called players. I don't see anything called players. There's nothing in here. I'm like, all right, well, I would like to somehow pass these players down. Well, we can't do it this way. Obviously, we can't do it this way. We need to use a different keyword here. So we're going to have to restructure this just a little bit. The keyword to use here is called render. Okay? And so when we render something, what we can do is pass a component. Okay? So I can pass in a component. So I'm going to call this roster is what we're going to be passing in. And yet it's still great. Look, cross-origin thread, something's not right here. So when we pass this in like this, we need to pass it in using fat arrows. Okay, so this is a callback. You just can't give it a component. You have to set it up as a callback in order for this to work. Okay, so render changes things up a little bit. When we called these components, we just called them by name. We didn't put the, the brackets and the greater than, less than sign, the force. So we didn't do that. But we need to do that here as though they are normal components. If I was to leave these out, think it would break. Oh, no, it didn't break. Interesting. Okay. Let me make sure it works. No, something's broken. The roster's not working. Okay. But if I add these, roster, here, this, see roster page? Now it's working. Okay. So now that I have that, I still need to pass down the thing that we're trying to pass, right? So how do we pass down, excuse me, the actual value that we need to get down to that component? All right. So I'm going to go here. Now that we're in the components, we can easily do something like players, and that players can equal players, right? Since we're importing it directly anyway. Players, right? This is the normal way that we would pass prompts to a component, correct? It's the normal way. So now that I passed it, and I go to home, right, I'm going to get rid of, I don't want to see all of those. I'm going to get rid of everything here. I'm going to go to roster, and look, this is roster, this is players, right? So if I go back to roster, this is roster, props, and look what I got. I got my players, right? Didn't we see more info earlier? I'm going to say yes, right? Everyone's like, yeah, I saw a bunch of stuff. I saw stuff like history and match and all this other stuff, and I'm like, well, where'd that stuff come from, right? And I can emulate this again, because even in, say, schedule, let me just do schedule, and I'll say console log this schedule. I'll just say schedule props, right? Now, I'm not passing anything to schedule, right? Nothing's being passed to schedule now. If I go back to main, schedule really doesn't have anything being passed. So I'm going to go to schedule now. Let's take a look. Schedule. Oh, look, I get this whole thing again. I get this history, location, and match. And what you can see from it is that it's got information about the route itself and some actions. But like I said, we're going to get into that the second half of tonight. But what I want you to see is that we don't have that in roster. We kind of lost that in roster. All right? I would like to get that back, though. I may want that later on for whatever reason. Let's just say we want that data accessible in roster. And the reason why we do want it accessible is this. I'm going to go back to, where's iStocks? Let me see, is iStocks here? All right. Ultimately, we're going to be using some buttons to go back and forth. And I can go, I can push a new route in. I can go back using a method. All that functionality that I'm going to execute here to move things around, at least for these two, are coming from that extra information that's here, okay? This history thing actually has some methods that we can use. So I don't need it now, but let's just say I would like to pass that down. Well, now I would have to do this. I have to pass props down, so I have to give the callback a value, right? A argument, right? It's a callback. I'm going to give it the argument here. And I am going to do this. Curly braces, ... props. Let me just space that out. Okay. Let's take a look and see what happens. Okay. Let's get rid of all this. I go to let's just make sure schedule still shows just props, just that roster. Roster now shows all of the same things, including player. Okay? Player is also being shown here as well. And so what this syntax does here is we're passing something in, right? This props is being passed in, and it just knows, like putting the placeholder, it just knows to take something. That's really all it is. It's almost like when we called the event, like e.prevent default, E was kind of at times just accessible. Like if we put the placeholder there for E, we didn't even have to like send E up. As long as the function had a placeholder, an argument, or I'm sorry, a parameter with E or event, or whatever you wanted to call it, we had it accessible, right? We didn't have to call the method and be like, pass it E. We didn't really have to do that because it already kind of knew it was there. Same thing here. If I put the placeholder here, it's going to give me all the props that it would have naturally passed down, right? And then all I do with this is, what is this doing? Can anyone tell me what that's doing? What does that look familiar?
Explodes the props, like I don't remember the exact term, but like with the list, we explode it into elements.
Yeah.
Spread operator?
It's called the spread operator. Exactly. So what we're doing is we're spreading out the object and creating brand new key value pairs. And those key value pairs get aggregated into props. The props itself is like, I want you to include all these props, all of the key value pairs and props, and I want you to concatenate it or add this with you.
The other ones I put.
Okay, I'm gonna, yeah, okay. I'm gonna,
No. The ones that I put in the washing machine are mine.
there you go. All right, I'm just muting everyone. Right? Put them in the washing machine. All right. I wouldn't have known unless they told me, right? So this is how we can spread things out. And this is actually familiar with what? Does that look familiar when we did it with where? Where was the other functionality that we actually did something similar to this? Does anybody remember?
Previous state?
Previous state, right? And we did it in what kind of lab were we working on? What was it? Was it... Oh, where's my code?
The color one, right? The color picker?
It was, but what part of it? Like, where was it? Where did we spread something out in order to include the previous values?
When we were trying to add a color, we kept all the previous colors and then appended the custom color at the end.
We did do that, and we did that with an array, but now we're doing the spread operator on an object, correct? So this is where we did it. Remember the form? When we have the form data was an object, right? So this key has an object in state. So anytime you have a nested object in state and you want to update one of the keys of that object, then you must spread the other values out. Otherwise, you lose them completely. It overwrites them. So we say, give me all the previous values, and I'm going to update one of those values. So this is just an example of taking the object form data, spreading it out, and then updating one single value. It doesn't matter which one of these is passed in. It doesn't matter if I'm typing in password, then I'm going to spread both of those values and then update just the password value. Okay, otherwise you will lose it. You don't do this. If I start typing an email address, password will be gone. It won't even exist in form data anymore. It's gone. Okay, so I just want to bring that up because we're kind of seeing that happen here. When we spread it out, React is like, give me all of those key value pairs and I'll turn them into like, you know, props, and I'll append this prop and everybody's good, right? That's what we're seeing right now, okay? Cool. Now that I passed it down to roster, right, what do we have to do now? So this is the kind of big chunk of logic that we have to work out now. Now that I passed it down to roster, we need to do something in roster. And I think, Abner, you had mentioned what we need to do, right? We need to...
Yeah, we need to loop over the data to create the links.
Exactly. So in here, we would need to do something like, I don't know, I'm going to say let players equal to props dot players, right? And that's an array. That should be an array of objects dot map. Okay, I'm going to say, hey, here's the player. Usually I use the keywords of D and I, but I'm going to use players so it's semantically more in line with what we're trying to do. And in here, I need to return something, right? So I'm going to say return. And how about we return an LI with, I have to take a look and see what the players' names are. Like, I don't know where their values are. So here's the player, and I see name, dot name. So I can say here, player dot name. Okay? So I'm going to return a list, a bunch of LIs with the player's name, and then here, down here, I can say, hey, UL, and in the UL, I will just call players. Why is this not working here? Let me see. What did I do wrong? Jason, oh, anyone tell me the error? Like from the error, what am I doing wrong? This is like JSX 101.
You need to return div.
What's that?
You need to return one element because
one element, correct. So I'm going to show you a little trick. Like there's two ways to I could do this, right? This is like the easiest solution. Oh, I'll just do this, and that works, right? We know that that'll work, and I'll push these over. Oh, what's happening here? Thrown an error, import styles. What the hell is going on here? React doesn't have access to the actual error in development. Well, that's kind of weird. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of players because I want to see if players is causing the problem. Players is not causing the problem. All right, I'm going to do this because I want to see where the problem is. I don't know. I'm going to go back to what I had before. Oh, you know what? Did I miss? All right. So something else is happening here, right? Because all I did was undo what I did, and all of a sudden now this thing is kind of acting crazy. So I'm going to comment
It
this
says it's
out.
an index.
Yeah, but oh, you know why? There you go. There we go. Here we go.
You're still returning all of them.
Yeah, so here we would also have to return the key, right? So here we need to include the key, but key should be, and I have to include player, and I'm going to put here index, so we're all on point that you can't just return this LI. It needs to have an index associated with it. Okay, now it's still giving me an error though. Like this thing here is causing the problem. So if I comment this out, everything works, right? If I go back to it, something here isn't working. So players, props.players.map, player, right? This ends this ends this. Here's the return. So I don't see why.
What if you wrap your li in a div? So this way you just return one div.
Well, I'm not even, hold on one second. I don't even know what just happened. I think I just lost it. Let me redo this. Li, I'm just going to put your test. I want to see the most basic thing, right? We should be able to do this because I'm not even calling players at this point in time. Like players isn't even being run anywhere. Like I'm just saying players is equal to props.players.map, and I'm just mapping over the thing. Like I'm not even.
What happens if you just put div instead of li?
Let's see. Yeah, still errors. It's really weird that it is doing this because I'm going to try something else. I'm going to just try my troubleshooting skills here, and let's see. If I put this on all just one line, let me see. If I return just that, does that fix it? That doesn't fix it either. That's really wild.
That's a syntax error. You have an extra for curly braces.
Oh yeah, I have the syntax. Let's see. No, still cross origin. It's really weird because I know we're getting this, and I know we've done this a bunch of times.
Okay.
Oh, is it props players? Oh, is it?
Misspelled players. Maybe it's player. No.
I think so. I'm going to go back to main and just make sure. Oh, look, you're right. I'm passing down player when I should have been passing down players. Yeah, right. I was talking to Connor earlier, and I was like, it's so easy to be up here and make crazy, silly mistakes. Like, so now I am going to go back to roster, and everything's working now. I'm just saying, like, the errors were misleading. Like, it should work, but that error was definitely misleading. So if I was just to go back to player, I get the error message, but it's not really telling me what it is. So this is one of those hard ones to figure out because it's not like, where's the error? What is it? I get all these like callback things. Like, I don't really know how to read that. I don't know what's going on. So I go back here. Next thing you know is, you would just console log and see, oh, that's the issue. All right. So I'm going to go back here. We know that we're doing this. I don't really want to do this. I want an LI. That's what I want. I want an LI. And I also want to put the key. So I am going to go to the next line. Okay. I like doing this and kind of separating things. All right. So I'm going to move this over. Right. Expected return value, fat hour. Okay. I have to return. I'm going to do this. Return that. And I'm going to give it a key that's equal to the index. Right. Sweet. And now here, now we'll go back to UL. All right, players, and we should see the play. Oh, what the hell? Players. This thing was just working. Let me get rid. Oh, this is where I was going to show you a little trick. Woo! All right, you ready? So we know that we could do div. All right, I'm going to make sure. Here's the thing. I feel like in my head, my brain is just going 20 miles an hour. We know that this would work. And I'm showing here test, right? These are LIs. There must be something where I'm setting these things to be like in CSS. They must be set to be, I don't know. They're not. They're maybe like display in line. They're not display block at this point in time. Yeah. The style none, display flex. Oh, yeah. Because here I would have to change this to be, if I wanted them to stack up in order, I would have to change the flex order to be a flex direction column. Okay, just showing. I'm sure everyone has seen Flexbox before. So I'll fix that later. That's just a little tweak inside of CSS here. So inside of CSS, I just have to do flex direction column. And it'll fix it. All right, let me go back to schedule. To roster. All right, here. So now we have it. The other trick I wanted to show you is I can include empty ones. Oh, can't do the empty ones. Oh, no, here. I can include empty tags. That works just as well. Okay, doesn't create an element, just kind of creates a faux pas element. Thing doesn't really exist. And the last one that we can do is it's called react.fragment. And react.fragment is what it is. It's like, it's not a real element, and it's just a fragment. So you can wrap something else in the React fragment, and it doesn't have to be a real thing. But if I have to choose between React fragment, which requires a lot more typing, versus that, I don't know, probably going to opt for that, right? Just seems easier to type out, right? Quick and dirty, get it done. So for the sake of what we're doing, though, I will leave React fragment because I want that to be something that you see and that you're aware of versus these empty ones, okay? And now I have all of my list items here, okay? Cool. So just to kind of recap what we did was this. We went into main and we imported switch and redirect. That was the first thing that we did, switch and redirect. And once we did switch and redirect, we went here and we added switch around the routes. We then decided to move the default route towards the bottom and remove the exact keyword, and everything worked like a charm. Then when we added the redirect, we needed to re-add the exact, otherwise it was never going to hit, right? We're having issues with that. So I added the exact keyword here and I put it here. If you're going to do this, then you might as well just put that default route at the very top, right? That's truly why people keep it at the top, because if you're going to use the exact keyword, just keep the route at the top and then all very specific routes towards the bottom. And then the redirect just says, you don't know where to go. Like, I don't know, you went someplace, I don't know where to go. I'm going to send you to this particular route, okay? Once again, if I was to go anywhere here and go to Flexbox is controlling these two schedules, right? It will take me back to the home page. Okay. Awesome. And then we decided we needed to pass the data down. So I imported players, right? I imported the data from the roster data file, and we used the render keyword instead of component to pass that prop down. And we made the decision that we wanted to pass down the rest of this information also, okay? We're not going to use it right now, but I wanted you to pass it down to get used to seeing how to pass it down. We will do it in after we work through the first lab, okay? And then we went to roster and we looped over, and then created the things, right? That's really what we did. We created these elements, and that's really it, right? And then we output them here. Cool? Not too much, right?
Joe, quick question for you. I know we were using switch in the way that it would do like the most direct first and then go down.
Yeah.
If we were using exact path, what would be the purpose of using switch?
You wouldn't. Yeah. Switch is just like put the most specific paths at the top and then we'll go down and I'll only render the most specific one. What you're going to see later is with switch is when we start to have things like, oh, like ID here, that may trigger two routes, roster and another route that has roster/ID. So the roster path might duplicate itself later on, okay? Just like this. Here's roster, and when I click on one, it's roster/1. So with the, if we don't include switch, then when it hits roster, roster is going to show, and then roster1 is also going to show. The two components will render together. So I would have to go back and start adding exact keywords everywhere, or just add switch and only add the exact keyword to the default path. So that's really the functionality there, okay? Sweet. How are we feeling? Questions? Questions? All right. So let's do this. Before I give the lab, why don't we take, I'm going to say why don't we just take a 5-minute break. I know we're always running out of time. I always feel pressed for time. So I'm going to cut our little break in half. Hope nobody's going to get mad. Cut it to 5 minutes so that we just have those 5 more minutes. Is that cool? So like thumbs up, thumbs down. We're good? All right, sweet. Awesome. So 8:52, come back at 8:57, and then we'll jump into the lab. 8:57. I'll be here. I'm just going to jump off and go get some water. 8:57. Is because the thing that we just built really has everything. And there's just a few tweaks to it, maybe the naming conventions of components, maybe the names of the routes, those kinds of things, the name of the data imports. So if you're ever like, what should we do? Just take a look at what's there and kind of emulate that. You know, try to like do it, obviously, and then when you like, oh, it's not working, let's take a look and look back. Only because I do see some nuances, like, you know, right, you're importing it here, and it's being passed down, but it's not working. You're like, why is that not working? And that's because when we pass down props here, it's not that thing anymore, right? It's like props dot whatever we passed in here. It's not the same thing anymore. So that's going to be an issue. So, instead of doing components, you might want to, or try to have imported the data in here and then looped through it here. Once again, you could do that and you could make it work. But then you wouldn't have worked with the render component, right? You would have just kind of bypassed the render. And it's really important that you understand the render component. That's like a key thing that we have to kind of wrap our head around. So it was just about importing the data, creating this new routes, adding it as a render, passing the data, and then in dashboard, we would just loop over the data, returning back the name, and seeing the stock data, right? That's really all we needed to do there, okay? So now we're going to move on to just to the last thing that we need to cover, and that is using params.
Joe, I do have a question, and feel
Sure.
free to tell me to maybe like ask it in the office hours.
Sure, yeah. What's up?
So that error, like we ran into it, and the way we fixed it basically was after the console log, essentially, we just literally typed in const stock data equals props stock data.
Yeah.
and play, it was fine because now, and past that, is there a way to like still pass it all the way from app here, but like pass it, but go without like defining the separate variable for it?
There is a way to do it. Off the top of my head, I forgot the way. Like I'd have to quickly look it up.
Right, I don't want to waste time right now.
Yeah, there is a way to do it. Yeah. I just feel like since we're passing props here, it's always going to see that prop as the thing. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that solution. Just off the top of my head, I forgot the proper way to pass that down. But you found the solution, like you found a secondary way of doing it, like defining it up here as a variable and then just passing that variable down, just kind of like we did with this. All right, so the next thing, so I'm going to fork this and what's going on here? Okay. Yeah, we're recording. Is anybody else? All right. So my arrows in the browser. Okay. So the last thing that we want to do here, and I'm going to go to the baseball because that's where we had left off with the code along. So here it is. I'm going to go back to main. Now, when I see the roster, oh, what happened here? I'm passing everything down. Where's my players? Oh, that's schedule. For some reason, roster's not working. This was just working before. Oh, hold on one second. Get out of that. Here it is. No. So I feel like these are like overlapping. Home is now doing the roster page. All right, this is a little weird, right? Got the schedule page.
You changed the CSS earlier.
Oh, is that? Oh, man. Okay, let me go back. Let me just open up what I had slacked out earlier because I closed mine. Solution. Code sandbox. All right, let me just open this up. Okay, here we go. I just found it out. I'm going to go back here and just take a look. So I have schedule roster. I did change up the CSS, but like these should not be doing that. So I'm just for the sake of getting rid of this flex direction column, right? Let me get rid of that. All right. All right. Now these particular ones. So what I can do is, if I went back into roster and I gave the UL a specific class, like class name is equal to roster, then I can go back in here in the CSS and then just do, I don't know, UL dot roster and then do these things. Display flex. Actually, I just have to do flex direction column, right? Should work. There we go. All right. So I'm just targeting these specific. All right. CSS drives me crazy. I'm going to go back to main. All right. What I want to do now is provide the ability to interpret user input. And not necessarily user input, but when we do go and change the route, if I go back to at iStocks, we go roster. I don't have the roster here. What did I do with it? What did I do? It's current price. Here we go. If I go here and I click on this, I see that it puts the number 1 and it gives me the person at position 1, right? I can go back. I can go to defender 2, I get 2, and I get defender 2, right? So it's showing me that particular player, okay? So how do we set up, first, how do we set up these things to be clickable, right? So to me, that would be the first thing. So if I go back to roster, when I create these elements, I need to somehow add a link to those things, right? So when I go here and I create this LI, I need to kind of add a new link to it. So when I do click on the thing, I can actually see the change or execute a change to the URL, right? So let's do that. So when we loop over these things, I have the key. I have the player, I have the LI, right? What I want to do is this. In the map, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, before I return, I'm going to say let path name equal to, I'm going to use string interpolators. I'm going to say player / and I'm going to put here, I'm going to say the index. Let's try the index, right? Now, I'm going to take a look and see what these objects that we're outputting, what is it, all the information that they have, right? Here's the player, here's number. So I'm not going to do index, I'm going to do number, right? And it's got to be player dot number, right? Okay. Because that targets the thing specifically, right? Its number is like an index. Maybe I could do it based on its position too, right? I mean, I could say at position this, grab that thing, right? That might actually make it easier to find the thing because doing it by number means I have to loop over the thing and grab it. But in the real world, if I'm grabbing information from a database and that these numbers, that would be actually the same thing, right? These would be the same thing. Let's just leave it as number for now. But I could have just done the index because in the array, I just grabbed this thing at that position and I got it. Instead of looping over the filtering the array, looking and returning only back the thing that has a number of 1. But let's just leave it right there. So I have the path of the thing. And now that I have the LI, in the LI, I also want to add, I'm going to just put these on 2 separate lines here, okay? We're going to wrap this thing around and we are going to add a link. So here's the value that we want to click on, right? We want to click on the player.name, but I'm going to add a link, and we're going to error out real quick, but just give me a second. Add a link to, and I'm going to say path name, okay? And then we have to close our link, right? Now it's erroring out because it's like you didn't import the link tag, right? Link was never imported. So, or did I, path to?
Close the header tab.
All right, we did this, and I don't have this. I did close this though, right? I got index.
Nope. You didn't put a close bracket at the end of player.name.
Here? No, here, right? Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, this one closes this. Let me just take a look. All right. Path to, path name, close, then parens around this. Parens, I think. Give me 1 second, because I think what's happening is we're not importing link from.
Yeah, you're right. I'm bad. Sorry.
Okay. No, once again, like, I make so many mistakes up here with typos, I have to just take everyone's word like I'm typing something wrong. But so now that I have this, what I'm doing is I'm outputting an LI, but I'm outputting an LI that actually has a link tag, and so the whole thing is clickable now. So if I do this and I go back to see our page, actually here, let me do this because I think that's the other one, right? Here we go. Now I have here, if I click on this, oh, it just takes me back. Well, why does it take me back? Why do you think it takes me back?
Redirect.
Yeah, the redirect. There is no route that has that. Now, I'm going to go back to roster. I'm going to go take a look at developer tools just to confirm that this thing now, you can tell that it's an anchor tag, that it has it. And we're saying, hey, take me here. And we're like, I don't really know where there is, so I'm going to take you back. So now that we've updated these, all we have to do is go back to our main route. And now we are going to add a new route in main, okay? And the new route is going to have, right here, let me go here, move this over here. There's a lot of room here. All right, so, oh, here we go. A new route, okay? The path is going to be equal to roster, and I'm gonna say ID, right? Or number or something. I'll just call it ID, but it's colon ID. And this colon right here is indicative of it's an additional parameter that we're passing in, And we're almost kind of sending data to the server. Here we're just doing routing on the React side, but if this was server-side routing, we'd be sending over to the server a route, and it would grab the ID, and it would know what to look for. So let's say we have the path there, right? And we want to render something to the, do we have a player here? Boop, boop, boop. We just have the schedule and the roster, so we don't actually have the player. But say we had the player, and we wanted to render a player component, because we're going to need to have a player component in order to see that. We would have to render props, right? And we would need a new component right now, and we would call it player, right? We don't have the player component, so I'm going to need to create a player component. Props, and here we're going to send down players as well. We're going to send down the stocks. Here we're going to say players also, and players. And I'm just going to do the filtering down here, okay? All right. Now, I don't have a player component, right? So first off, I should really create a player.js, right? I can take some of these, like maybe just the home one. I'm just going to copy this so I have something to emulate. Player, okay? And this will just be player, okay? Just so I have something. All right, looks good. Right here. That looks good. I'll go back to main. Just copy this. Player, okay. So, what did I do wrong here? Oh, I can see something, just a color coding. So render is equal to, and curly brace is there. And a curly brace here, right? So players, this gets closed there. And we have all the syntax. Just drive you crazy. All right. So now I'm passing this thing down, okay? I'm passing the ID. What I want to do now is go into player just to see, console log, and see what player has. So I'm going to go to player. Here we go. First thing I'm going to do is console log and say, player component props. Props, okay? So let's go here. Let's see what we get. I'm going to get rid of everything. Here's my page. I click on this. We go roster. All right. Now I have players. It's passing down the player, okay? And I can see from here that it's passing down some of this other information too. It didn't pass down the params. Oh, here, params, it's not capturing. So let me take a look real quick. Let me see what's going on. Roster, click on here. Still takes me to this route, even though map, main, even though in main, we're doing it. This should have worked here. Let me try doing this. I almost feel like it's not hitting that particular route. All right, because it keeps taking me back to the Welcome to Tornado site. It's almost like it's not hitting this route. So I'm going to go back.
Maybe you should check the link.
In your function call?
Yeah, let me take a look. Which
I think
link?
it's your the player link that you're rendering inside roster.
It doesn't have function.
This one?
No, inside roster.js. I think your link is wrong. The path name.
Oh, it's play. Oh, because it should be roster, right? That's it. Okay, thank you. Right, roster ID. There you go. Okay. So let's go back here. Roster. Okay. So it's taking us here, but there's nothing there to show, right? So let me just see. This is roster, and this is props. Props is not defined. Oh, here we go. What did I forget? Forgot to put props here. Okay. So let me get rid of these errors. Roster. Boom. Okay, here's props. Here's history. What I want us to see is that we should see Go to match. Do you see there's a params here? Do you see in match, there's a params? Okay, now this says params for 3 because it's the third player. Now, what if I was to go back to roster and click on the first one? Okay, go to match. Do you see now I have an ID of 2? Okay, and so as we click on, if I go to Ben, I think I didn't click on the first one, I click on the second one. If I go here, I have a match, still an ID of 2. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that inside of match, there's params, and the params is this. The params is capturing what we typed in here. This is the param, this ID, right? Colon ID represents a parameter that we're passing in, right? And the fact that we're passing it in, look, it creates an object, kind of like props. Props is an object with key value pairs. When we do params, it also creates an object with the key of ID being the key that we defined it here. If I didn't call it ID, if I called it number, let me just change it to number and watch now how inside of this object, inside a match, it's now called number, okay? You can call it whatever you want, and it will return back or create the mapping between what you called it here and the value that's here. And now that we have the value, we can easily loop over inside of player. We could easily now loop over this because now we have all the players too, right? So I could do something like let player equal to props dot players, right? Just going to make sure, right? It is players. Players. Don't want to make the same mistake twice. Players dot filter, because now I'm filtering, right? And I could say player, right? And return where player dot number, right, is equal to props dot match dot params dot number, right? It's kind of long. This is it, and we can test this out, right? Let me just see. Expected. Tell me expected equal. All right. You don't have to scream at me. So now let's do this. I'm going to console log. This is player. And let's just see if we return back the single player, right? Okay. Get rid of this. Go to roster. Click on a player. Oh, it's an empty array. So let's see what happens. So here it is. Here would be the object. This would be props. This would be match. This would be params. This would be number. So player, right? Because players is an array. I'm filtering over the array. And I'm saying return where the player number is equal. Oh, you know what I think happened? I'm going to try this just real quick. I think it's a JavaScript thing. All right, do you see now I have a something, right? I'm going to change this back to the 3 equals, and now I don't have anything. Can anyone explain what happened there? It's a JavaScript thing.
Value in taught.
Yes. So the difference between the 2 equals and the 3 equals, that's right, is the fact that it not only matches the value, but the data type as well. So the data type is a string, right? So if we take a look here, the data type in match.params, this is a string. It's not a number. So when we just do the double equals, it's like, I don't know, it's going to coerce the number, the string into a number. So it does type coercion. But when you do the 3 equals, which is really advised that you do that, it doesn't do the coercion. So I would have to do something like parse int and like parse this thing into a number in order to get that to work. It's really a pain in the ass. Like, I really don't want to do that. That's just more work for me. So I kind of honestly would just do the double equals. But once again, that's proper coding right there. Okay. And now that I have the player, I could easily just output the player here, right? I could just say, I don't know, curly braces player dot, is it name, right? I think it's player dot name. And I should see it, right? Go to roster, boom. Oh, we're not seeing it. Why are we not seeing it? See, I know it's working. Like, I know we're getting it. Why? Here's player. Oh, because it's an array. That's why. So I would do this. It's an array of something, so I just can't do player.name. I have to say grab the first thing from the array, and then boom, Sam Sweeper. David David Defender. There we go. You see? See that? Okay. That's really what's happening. Okay. So the params, just to kind of recap what we just did, going here, we added a new path. This was the path that we added, right? So I'll just kind of isolate the path so we can see it. This new path was added, okay? And adding this path, we kind of emulate. I'm going to get rid of the exact here too. I don't think we need the exact. I think I added it to try to troubleshoot something. And, oh, we actually do. Look, doesn't work. So we need the exact path here. Or what could we do? What could be the other thing I do? When I use the switch keyword, why am I using the switch keyword?
The order matters with the switch.
Yeah. So the more specific the route should go on top. More specific routes go on top. So if I go here, now it works. Specificity counts with switch. You're using switch for the sake of specificity. So I can order my routes in the specific order instead of always using the exact keyword everywhere. Okay, the only reason why we moved this up here was because redirect wouldn't kick off because of path. So we had to make our decision. What do we want to do? Something has to give, and we have to use the exact keyword. So we have this route. So once again, I'm just going to separate the routes so we can see the routes. And we added this parameter. This is a param. Okay, and so in the URL, once it sees this value, we can grab it and then do something with it. Go to the database, look for the thing that has the param or the ID of this. Okay, and then we just pass down players so that we could loop over the players, right? And then we went to the player, and in here, we, once again, lots of console logs to make sure that we have it. I then filtered out for that specific player, right? I grabbed that specific thing using the filter method, and then I output its info. Now there's more info in there, so I could obviously extend this and use even like, you know, the React fragment here, and we could add, you know, the position if we wanted to. Here's the H1, but I could say, hey, here's an H2, and we could say, you know, player dot, is it position? I think so. No, it's not position. Oh, I missed the curly brace. Boom. Nope. Boom. There we go. There, position D, right? Probably want to say something like this. Position, right? Name, maybe, something like that. Whatever it is. Okay? And that's how we work with the params. Cool. Awesome. And we don't have time to jump into the rest of it, like another lab to configure it. So, yeah. Any questions on it, though? How are we feeling about route?
Joe, do you mind just going over the let player line and just what everything's doing individually?
Sure. Yeah, so what we're doing here with let player is to use the filter method. So filter is a looping construct, a looping method on arrays. And that will pass in, it passes in every object or everything in the array one at a time. It could be a string, it could be an object. And so with every iteration, player becomes that thing at that moment. And then we are saying, hey, where the player name is equal to the ID that we captured in the URL. Okay. And once we get player, this returns an array of the one thing. So it's a thing. But filter is meant to like filter one thing, or we could filter multiple things, right? Maybe if certain players were linebackers or quarterbacks, right? We could filter out and get all the quarterbacks if we wanted to. Right now we're looking for a specific person. So we use this props.match params, grab the number that was passed to us via the route, and then the bracket 0 is just to say grab the first thing in the array of things that were returned. We know there's only one. And then it's with that player now becomes an object. And so here I can grab the key value pairs of that object. Okay? Learning JavaScript, the array looping methods you should learn, should master, not even just learn, are for each, map, filter, and reduce. Those are like the 4 you should master when it comes to looping and looking for things and filtering things and doing things on an array. So any article out there that you read, like, what are the top ones to learn? These are going to be the ones. Can't escape that. So we're just using filter to do that. Cool? Awesome.
Joe, does that mean that using this method, well, you also need, so now every component like player needs to also have like a handling for potentially parameters that are not numbers, like if someone types in /raster /gibberish?
Yeah, so obviously if they do gibberish, now just think like they're never going to be typing in the gibberish, right? It's more like you're kind of controlling it. You're forcing the clicks of the things to change the URL. If they do go up there and they do change this to be something like, I don't know, 2, the number 2, well, that's going to break, right? So you're going to have to, at some point in time, maybe even come up with some conditional logic, to be like, hey, if it's not this value, then redirect them back here, right? Because I can't stop them from doing that. I can't say, 3, right? They could type in 3 and get where they need to get to, right? But if they type in anything else, and everything that we have depends on that thing being a number and us doing the filtering, it's going to break our code. So you would have to put some error correction in there to be like, hey, make sure it's a number. There wasn't a number. Please insert a number, or something like that. Or some redirect like, hey, I don't know where you want to go. Something like that. Cool? Awesome. All right. Let me go over the homework for our last minute. The homework is you building out something really basic. This is going to be up to where we captured IDs. So this doesn't include the IDs, but you're going to be building out a dentist little website. I think I had shown this. It just has 3 routes: a home, procedures, and contact. And that's really what you're going to be rendering out. Okay? And it's pretty detailed. It's kind of like the films lab. I'll do the thing, and it's pretty basic on how to do it. Okay. I do have the sample. That's the working example of the site. I put a working example here, but it's in the link. You're going to create your own code sandbox. You're going to add it. I did add a new link here for React Router Dentist. So just add your link there. And then for reading, we're going to be covering hooks next week. And hooks is like the newest way of writing components. It's like a combination of a class-based component and a functional component where you have access to state in the functional component. It's really cool. Everyone's starting to write in hooks. So we're going to learn hooks. So I just have 2 articles to read for hooks. If you want a bonus, the bonus was the memory game. So this thing, if you want to create it, build out your own React version, this is built in just plain JavaScript right here. It's got a class here. So this is a class-based game in JavaScript. And so it has methods and things, and you can look through it and possibly figure out how to reconstruct this. It's got a little navigation here. If I go here, this just takes me down. I would make the navigation disappear. I'd make the instructions be one page and the game be another page. I wouldn't scroll down, okay? That's just a bonus. If you want some challenges, you have the 2 other challenges. And then just another article to read on hooks. More stuff on hooks, so you're well-versed in hooks. Okay? Sound good? Awesome. Once again, reach out, office hours. Glad to help out. Exit tickets here. I will Slack out our exit ticket. I know I didn't have the link the last time, but it's the same link all the time. The link doesn't change for exit tickets. It's the same exit ticket. Okay? Cool. So I will post the video probably first thing in the morning. And yeah, I'll see everyone on Tuesday. Cool? Yeah.
Yeah.
You got it.
You.